Welcome to English Language Academy, The Princess and the Frog, English Story. Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom surrounded by forests and rivers, there lived a young princess named Lila. Lila was kind and curious, with a love for nature. She often wandered in the royal gardens, talking to the birds and admiring the flowers. Despite her royal life, she felt lonely. She longed for a true friend who would understand her heart. One sunny day, while walking near the palace pond, Lila found a golden ball. It was her favorite toy. She tossed it high into the air and caught it with joy. But then, the golden ball slipped from her hands and fell into the deep pond. Lila watched in despair as it sank to the bottom. As she sat by the water, tears streaming down her face, she heard a strange voice. "Why are you crying, dear princess?" Lila looked around and saw a small green frog sitting on a lily pad. Surprised, she replied, "My golden ball has fallen into the pond, and I don't know how to get it back." The frog smiled and said, "I can help you retrieve your ball, but what will you give me in return?" Lila thought for a moment and said, "Anything you want, gold, jewels, or fine clothes. Just bring back my ball." The frog shook his head. "I do not want treasures. Promise me that you will let me eat from your plate, drink from your cup, and sleep in your room." Lila hesitated, but finally agreed. "All right, I promise," she said, thinking that a frog could never live in a palace. With that, the frog dove into the water. Moments later, he emerged holding the golden ball in his mouth. Lila was overjoyed. She took the ball and ran back to the palace, forgetting all about her promise. A surprising guest that evening. As Lila sat at the grand dining table with her family, there was a soft knock at the door. A servant opened it, and to everyone's surprise, the small green frog hopped into the room. The frog looked directly at Lila and said, "Princess, I have come to claim your promise." Lila's cheeks turned red. She remembered her words but felt embarrassed in front of her family. Her father, the king, asked what was going on. Lila explained the story, and the king said, "A promise must be kept, my dear. Let the frog stay." Reluctantly, Lila placed the frog on the table. He ate from her plate and drank from her cup. Though she found it strange, she kept her word. After dinner, the frog followed her to her room. "I am tired," he said. "Please let me sleep on your pillow." Lila was horrified but remembered her promise. She placed the frog gently on a small pillow beside her. That night she couldn't sleep, wondering why she had made such a foolish promise. The magic of friendship. Over the next few days, the frog continued to stay with Lila. At first, she found him annoying, but soon she noticed his kindness and cleverness. He told her stories about the forest and made her laugh with his jokes. Lila began to enjoy his company and no longer felt lonely. One night, as Lila prepared for bed, the frog said, "Lila, thank you for keeping your promise. You have been a true friend to me." Touched by his words, Lila gently kissed the frog on his forehead. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room. When the light faded, the frog was gone, and in his place stood a handsome young prince. Lila gasped in amazement. The prince smiled and said, "I was cursed by an evil witch and turned into a frog. Only the kindness and friendship of a true heart could break the spell. You have freed me, Princess Lila." A happy ending. The prince and Lila became close friends, and their bond grew stronger each day. They spent their days exploring the kingdom and helping those in need. Over time, their friendship blossomed into love. They married in a grand celebration, and the entire kingdom rejoiced. Lila and the prince ruled with kindness and wisdom, always remembering the lessons of their unusual friendship. And so, they lived happily ever after, proving that true friendship and kindness can transform even the most unlikely of stories. The end. The Fox and the Grapes. English Story. Once upon a time, in a lush green forest surrounded by mountains and streams, there lived a clever yet slightly vain fox named Felix. Felix was known throughout the forest for his intelligence and his quick wit. He often prided himself on being able to solve puzzles and overcome obstacles that others couldn't. But Felix had one weakness. He could sometimes be too proud to admit when something was beyond his reach. One bright and sunny morning, Felix woke up feeling especially hungry. His stomach growled like a thunderstorm, reminding him that he had skipped his meal the night before. Determined to find something delicious to eat, Felix set off on a journey through the forest. He trotted past tall trees, chirping birds, and scampering squirrels, his nose twitching in search of food. After wandering for a while, Felix stumbled upon a vineyard on the edge of the forest. It was a magnificent sight. Rows of grapevines stretched as far as the eye could see, and hanging from the vines were clusters of ripe, juicy grapes. They were a deep purple, glistening in the sunlight, and they looked absolutely mouth-watering. Felix's eyes lit up with excitement. "Ah, these grapes look perfect!" he exclaimed. "Just what I need to satisfy my hunger." But there was one problem. The grapes were hanging high up on the vines, far beyond Felix's reach. He glanced around, hoping to find something he could use to climb or knock the grapes down, but there was nothing useful nearby. Felix wasn't one to give up easily. "I'm a clever fox," he told himself. "Surely I can find a way to get those grapes." He decided to try jumping for them. Felix backed up a few steps, crouched low, and leaped as high as he could. His paws stretched out toward the grapes, but he missed by a good few inches. Determined, he tried again, this time running even faster before jumping. But no matter how hard he tried, the grapes remained just out of reach. Felix paused to catch his breath, his chest heaving from the effort. "Maybe I need to approach this differently," he thought. He began to explore the area around the vineyard, looking for anything that could help him reach the grapes. He tried stacking rocks to make a small platform, but the rocks kept tumbling down. He even tried using a long stick to poke at the grapes, but the stick wasn't long enough. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Felix grew increasingly frustrated. His stomach continued to grumble, and his pride was beginning to take a hit. How could he, the cleverest fox in the forest, fail at something as simple as getting a bunch of grapes? Finally, Felix sat down beneath the grapevine, glaring up at the tempting fruit. He knew he had tried everything he could think of, but the grapes were still out of reach. After a moment of silence, Felix stood up, brushed the dirt off his fur, and said aloud, "These grapes are probably sour anyway. I wouldn't want them even if I could reach them." With that, Felix turned and walked away, his tail swishing behind him. Deep down, he knew the grapes weren't sour, but it was easier to pretend he didn't want them than to admit defeat. As Felix made his way back into the forest, he tried to focus on finding other food. Along the way, he came across a patch of wild berries growing near a stream. They weren't as grand as the grapes, but they were sweet and satisfying. Felix ate his fill and quenched his thirst with the cool water from the stream. While he enjoyed his meal, Felix reflected on the day's events. "Maybe I should learn to accept that not everything is within my reach," he thought. "It's okay to fail sometimes, as long as I don't let it stop me from trying again in the future." From that day on, Felix continued to explore the forest and solve challenges, but he also learned to be a little more humble. And though he never did taste the grapes from the vineyard, he found plenty of other adventures and delicious meals to keep him happy. The forest remained alive with stories of Felix's cleverness, and the tale of the fox and the grapes became a favorite among the animals. It was a reminder to all that sometimes It's okay to let go of what you can't have and focus on the good things that are within your reach. The end. The Proud Rose, English Story Chapter 1, The Garden's Secret. Once upon a time, in a lush and vibrant garden, there grew a young rose bush. Among its branches, a single bud began to bloom, revealing the most beautiful rose the garden had ever seen. Her petals were the softest pink, her scent was sweet and enchanting, and she stood tall, basking in the admiration of all who passed by. "Look at me," said the rose, her voice proud and melodious. "I am the most beautiful flower in this entire garden." The other flowers whispered among themselves. The daisies, the lilies, and even the bright marigolds looked at the rose with a mix of awe and annoyance. "She is indeed lovely," murmured a daisy, "but beauty is not everything." The rose heard this and turned her head away. "They are jealous," she thought. "They do not understand what it is like to be admired by everyone." Nearby, an old oak tree listened to the rose's words. "Beauty is fleeting, little one," he said gently. "What matters is the kindness you show and the love you share." The rose huffed. "You only say that because you are old and covered in rough bark. What could you know of beauty?" The oak tree said no more, but his deep roots trembled with sorrow. He had seen many seasons and many roses come and go. He knew that the rose's pride would bring her lessons. He could only hope she would learn them with grace. Chapter 2. The Visitor. One sunny morning, a small bee buzzed into the garden. He was tired from his journey and looking for nectar. Spotting the rose, he flew over eagerly. "Good day, dear rose," said the bee. "May I gather some nectar from your lovely petals?" The rose lifted her head high. "I am too beautiful to be touched by a common bee. Go to the daisies or marigolds. They are plain and will not mind." The bee hesitated. "But Rose, sharing your nectar helps the garden grow. Without bees, the flowers cannot thrive." "That is not my concern," replied the rose coldly. "Go away." The bee sighed and flew off to the daisies, who welcomed him warmly. As he worked, the other flowers whispered to one another about the rose's unkindness. Chapter 3. The storm days turned into weeks, and the garden thrived under the summer sun. The rose continued to stand tall and proud, receiving compliments from visitors and basking in her beauty. But one evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind began to howl, and the first drops of rain fell. The garden braced itself for a storm. The rose shivered as the wind tugged at her delicate petals. "Oh no," she cried. "I cannot endure such a storm. My petals will be ruined." The old oak tree, sturdy and strong, bent his branches to shield the smaller flowers. "Hold on, little ones," he whispered. "This storm will pass." But the rose, too proud to ask for help, stood alone. The wind grew stronger, and her petals began to tear. She cried out in fear, but no one came to her aid. When the storm finally passed, the garden was quiet. The rose was no longer the most beautiful flower. Her petals were tattered and her stem was bent. She wept softly, feeling both ashamed and alone. Chapter 4. A Lesson in Kindness. The next morning, the sun rose, casting a golden light over the garden. The bee returned, humming a cheerful tune. He noticed the rose's damaged state and felt a pang of sympathy. "Good morning, Rose," he said kindly. "You look like you had a rough night." The rose turned away, embarrassed. "Why do you speak to me? I was cruel to you." The bee landed gently on a nearby leaf. "Because kindness is not about what you receive, but what you give. If you allow, I can help you heal." The rose hesitated, then nodded. The bee carefully gathered nectar from her remaining petals. And as he did, the rose felt a warmth she had never known. She realized that sharing her nectar was not a loss, but a gift that brought life to the garden. Over the days, the other flowers also came to check on the rose. The daisies, marigolds, and even the lilies offered their encouragement. Slowly the rose began to bloom again, this time with a new understanding of beauty and kindness. Chapter 5: The Rose's Change. The rose no longer stood tall with pride but with gratitude. She welcomed the bees, butterflies, and even the occasional ant. She shared her nectar freely and listened to the stories of the other flowers. The old oak tree watched with a smile. "You have grown, little one," he said one evening. "I have," replied the rose. "I have learned that true beauty lies not in how you look, but in how you make others feel." And so, the rose became the heart of the garden, admired not only for her beauty but for her kindness and generosity. The garden thrived, and the rose found a joy deeper than any compliment could bring. The End. The Wise Old Owl. English Story Chapter 1: The Forest Home. In a quiet forest far from cities and towns, there lived a wise old owl named Oliver. Oliver was a barn owl with bright golden eyes that seemed to see everything. His feathers were soft and white, and he perched high in the tallest tree of the forest. The other animals respected Oliver because he was not only wise but also kind. Whenever anyone had a problem, they came to him for advice. The forest was a magical place where all creatures lived in harmony. Birds chirped happily, rabbits hopped through the bushes, and squirrels raced up and down the trees. There was a clear river that ran through the forest, providing water for everyone. The trees stood tall and proud, their leaves rustling gently in the wind. This was Oliver's home, and he loved it dearly. But the peace of the forest was sometimes disturbed. One day, the young rabbit named Ruby ran to Oliver's tree, her small paws trembling. "Oliver," she called out, her voice shaking, "something is wrong." Oliver opened his eyes and looked down from his branch. "What is it, Ruby?" he asked in his calm, deep voice. "There are strange noises near the river," Ruby said. "It sounds like growling, and it's scaring everyone." Oliver tilted his head, listening carefully. "Let me come down," he said. He spread his wings and glided gracefully to the ground. Ruby led him toward the river, her little ears twitching nervously. When they reached the river, Oliver saw a group of animals huddled together. There were deer, foxes, and even a family of raccoons. They all looked frightened. "What is troubling you?" Oliver asked. "We heard loud growls," said a young deer. "It sounded like a bear, but we haven't seen any bears in this forest for years." Oliver thought for a moment. "Stay together and stay calm," he advised. "Let me investigate." Chapter 2: The Mystery Unfolds. Oliver flew up high into the sky, his sharp eyes scanning the forest below. He circled the river area, listening for the mysterious growls. After a while, he spotted something unusual near the edge of the forest. There was a small group of men with machines. They were cutting down trees and making loud noises. "Humans," Oliver murmured to himself. He knew they could be both helpful and harmful. The noise and the fear among the animals were caused by these machines, not a bear. Oliver returned to the group of animals and explained what he had seen. "There are humans cutting down trees," he said. "They mean no harm to us directly, but they are disturbing our home. We must find a way to speak to them." "But how can we talk to humans?" asked Ruby. "They don't understand us. We don't speak their language," Oliver agreed. "But we can show them how important this forest is." Chapter 3: The Plan. Oliver gathered the animals of the forest for a meeting. They sat in a large circle under the moonlight. Everyone was there: birds, rabbits, foxes, deer, and even the shy hedgehogs. Oliver explained his plan. "We will show the humans the beauty of our forest and how much it means to us," he said. "If they see how we live here, maybe they will think twice about cutting down the trees." The animals nodded. They trusted Oliver's wisdom. Each group of animals had a role to play. The birds would sing their sweetest songs, the deer would show their graceful movements, The foxes and raccoons would demonstrate their cleverness by building small shelters with sticks. Everyone agreed to do their best. Chapter 4. The Human Encounter. The next morning, Oliver led the animals to the area where the humans were working. The men were busy with their machines, and the noise was loud. But when the animals appeared, the men stopped and stared in amazement. The birds began to sing, filling the air with melodies. The deer moved gracefully through the clearing, and the smaller animals worked together to build a tiny shelter. Oliver flew down and perched on a low branch, watching the humans closely. One of the men, a young worker, seemed especially moved. "Look at them," he said to his companions. "This forest is their home. Maybe we should think about what we're doing here." The other men hesitated. They had never seen the forest animals so close before, and the sight touched their hearts. "Maybe we can talk to our boss," said another worker. "We can ask if there's another way to get wood without harming this forest." Chapter 5. A New Beginning. The humans left that day, and the forest was quiet again. The animals waited anxiously, wondering if their efforts had worked. A few days later, the men returned, but this time they brought their boss. The boss looked around the forest and listened to the workers' stories about the animals. "This forest is special," the boss said. "We will find another area to work in, one that is not home to so many creatures." The animals cheered when they heard the news. Oliver smiled, proud of his community. "Together, we can achieve anything," he said. From that day on, the forest remained a safe and peaceful place. The humans even planted new trees to replace the ones they had cut down. Oliver continued to watch over the forest, ready to help whenever his wisdom was needed. And so, the wise old owl and his friends lived happily, knowing they had protected their home for generations to come. The End. The Milkmaid and Her Pail. English Story Chapter 1. Early Morning at the Farm. Patty the milkmaid lived on a small farm, nestled in a peaceful countryside. Every morning, just as the sun began to rise, she would get up to milk the cows. Patty loved her mornings. The air smelled fresh, and the gentle sounds of animals waking up filled her with peace. This morning was no different. With her wooden milk pail in hand, she walked toward the barn, her bare feet brushing against the soft, dew-covered grass. The cows greeted her with gentle lowing as she entered. "Good morning, Bessie," Patty said to the cow she was about to milk. Bessie's warm eyes seemed to understand Patty's words. Patty set the pail beneath her and began milking with practiced hands. Soon, the pail was half full of creamy milk. As she worked, Patty's mind began to wander. She loved to dream about the future and all the possibilities life could hold for her. Today, a particularly vivid dream started forming in her mind. Chapter 2. Dreaming Big. Patty stared at the milk filling her pail and thought about what she could do with it. "If I sell this milk at the market," she mused aloud, "I'll earn enough money to buy a dozen eggs. Then I can hatch them into chicks. When the chicks grow, I'll sell them as chickens and make even more money." She smiled as her dream grew bigger. "With that money, I'll buy myself a beautiful new dress," she continued. "And when I wear it, everyone in the village will admire me. I might even catch the eye of the handsome baker's son. Who knows? We might get married." Patty's eyes sparkled as her imagination painted this bright future. Her pail was nearly full now, and she stood up to carry it back to the house. But her mind was so wrapped up in her dream that she hardly noticed where she was walking. Chapter 3. A Sudden Crash. As Patty walked, she began to imagine the grand moment when everyone in the market would notice her new dress. She tossed her head as if to mimic the proud gesture she would make. In that instant, she lost her balance, and the pail of milk tumbled to the ground. Patty gasped as the milk spilled across the dirt. Her dreams evaporated as quickly as the milk seeped into the earth. She stared at the empty pail, her heart sinking. "Oh no!" she cried. "What have I done?" She sank to her knees and tried to salvage what little milk she could, but it was useless. All her hard work and dreams for the future were gone in a single moment of carelessness. Chapter 4: Learning the Lesson. Patty returned to the barn and sat down on a hay bale. She felt defeated. Bessie, sensing her distress, nudged her gently with her nose. Patty patted the cow's head and sighed. "I suppose I learned something important today," she said softly. "I should focus on what I'm doing and not count my chickens before they hatch." As she spoke, she realized how true her words were. She had let her excitement for the future distract her from the present moment. Patty resolved to be more careful in the future and to take each step one at a time. Chapter 5: Starting Fresh. The next morning, Patty woke up with a renewed sense of determination. She grabbed her pail and headed to the barn. This time, as she milked Bessie, she stayed focused on her task. She still dreamed about the future, but she reminded herself to keep her feet firmly planted in the present. Over time, Patty's careful efforts began to pay off. She sold her milk at the market, bought eggs, and raised her chicks into healthy chickens. Eventually, she earned enough money to buy a beautiful dress. And though her dreams didn't unfold exactly as she had imagined, she found happiness in the small, steady progress she made each day. Patty never forgot the lessons she learned from her spilled pail of milk. Whenever she felt tempted to dream too far ahead, she would smile and remind herself to focus on the task at hand. The story of Patty and her milk pail became well known in the village, and people often shared it with one another as a reminder to stay grounded and mindful. And Patty? She lived a happy and fulfilling life, one small step at a time. The End. The Golden Egg, English Story. Once upon a time, in a quiet little village surrounded by lush green fields and tall mountains, there lived a kind farmer named Ramu. Ramu had a small farm where he grew vegetables and kept a few animals. Among his animals was a beautiful white hen named Lucy. Lucy was not an ordinary hen. She was very special, though Ramu did not know it yet. A surprising discovery. One sunny morning, as Ramu was collecting eggs from the henhouse, he noticed something unusual. In Lucy's nest, there was an egg unlike any he had ever seen. It was golden and shiny, glittering in the sunlight. At first, Ramu thought it was a joke. Who could have put this here? He wondered. He picked up the golden egg and held it close. It felt heavier than a normal egg. Ramu was curious and decided to show it to his wife, Radha. "Look at this, Radha. Have you ever seen anything like it?" he asked. Radha's eyes widened in amazement. "It looks like gold. Do you think it's real?" Ramu wasn't sure, so he took the egg to the village goldsmith to find out. The goldsmith examined the egg closely, tapped it, and declared, "This is pure gold." Ramu was stunned. He couldn't believe his luck. "A golden egg? How is this possible?" he muttered to himself. The golden blessing. The next day, Ramu rushed to the henhouse to see if Lucy had laid another golden egg. To his delight, there was indeed another shiny golden egg in her nest. Day after day, Lucy continued to lay golden eggs. Ramu and Radha were overjoyed. They sold the eggs and became wealthy. Despite their newfound wealth, Ramu and Radha remained humble. They used their money to improve their farm, help their neighbors, and build a school for the village children. The villagers admired Ramu and Radha for their kindness and generosity. Greed takes over. As time passed, Ramu started to grow restless. He began to wonder how Lucy was able to lay golden eggs. If I could find out her secret, he thought, I could get all the gold at once. Why wait for one egg a day? Radha tried to stop him. "Don't be greedy, Ramu. Lucy's eggs are a blessing. Let her lay them in her own time. But Ramu couldn't resist his curiosity and greed. One day, he decided to find out the secret. While Lucy was resting in her coop, Ramu carefully took her in his hands and said, "Forgive me, Lucy, but I must know." He took a knife and gently cut Lucy open. To his horror, there was nothing inside but the normal organs of a hen. There were no golden eggs, no secret. Ramu realized his terrible mistake too late. Lucy was gone, and with her, the golden eggs. Lessons learned. Ramu was heartbroken. He had let greed cloud his judgment and lost the precious gift that had brought so much joy and prosperity. Radha comforted him, but she too was saddened by the loss of their beloved hen. The villagers were shocked to hear what had happened. They reminded Ramu of the old saying, "Greed destroys everything." Ramu learned a valuable lesson that day. He decided to make amends by continuing to use the wealth they had left to help others. Though he had lost Lucy, he vowed never to let greed take over his heart again. From that day on, Ramu and Radha lived a simple and content life, spreading kindness and sharing what they had with those in need. And though the golden eggs were gone, the memory of Lucy remained a golden lesson for the entire village. The end. The Farmer and the Well. English Story, Chapter 1. The Farmer's Problem. Long ago, in a small village, there lived a hard-working farmer named Ramu. Ramu worked day and night on his land to grow crops. He grew rice, wheat, and vegetables. His land was fertile, but he had one big problem. He didn't have enough water for his crops. The village had a river, but it was far from Ramu's field. Every morning, Ramu carried buckets of water from the river to his crops. It was tiring, and he couldn't bring enough water for all his plants. His crops were growing slowly, and he worried about the harvest. One day, while resting under a tree, Ramu had an idea. "If I have my own well, I won't need to carry water from the river," he thought. "I can save time and work more on my farm." Chapter 2. The Merchant's Offer. In the same village lived a rich merchant named Mohan. Mohan owned many wells, fields, and houses. He often rented his wells to farmers and charged them money for water. Ramu decided to visit Mohan. "Mohan," he said, "I want to buy one of your wells. How much will it cost?" Mohan smiled slyly. He saw an opportunity to make money. "Ramu," he said, "I will sell you the well near your field for 1,000 gold coins." Ramu's face fell. He didn't have that much money, but he didn't give up. "Can I pay you 100 gold coins now and the rest after the harvest?" he asked. Mohan thought for a moment. He agreed because he knew Ramu's crops depended on the well. "But remember," Mohan warned, "if you don't pay me on time, I will take back the well." Chapter 3. The Well Dispute. Ramu was happy. He started using the well and watering his crops every day. His plants began to grow, and he dreamed of a good harvest. But Mohan was greedy. A few weeks later, he came to Ramu's field and said, "Ramu, you can't use the water in the well anymore." Ramu was shocked. "Why not?" he asked. "I paid you for the well." Mohan smirked. "You paid for the well, but not the water inside it. The water belongs to me." Ramu couldn't believe his ears. He argued, "What will I do with an empty well? This is unfair." Mohan didn't care. He said, "If you want the water, you must pay me extra." Then he walked away, leaving Ramu worried and confused. Chapter 4. Seeking Justice. Ramu decided to seek justice. The village had a wise chief named Bola. Everyone respected him because he was fair and honest. Ramu went to Bola and explained the problem. Bola listened carefully. He called Mohan to the village square to settle the dispute. When Mohan arrived, Bola asked, "Mohan, is it true that you sold the well to Ramu?" "Yes," Mohan replied. "And did you tell Ramu that the water doesn't belong to him?" Bola asked. Mohan grinned. "Yes, I did. The water is mine." He only bought the well, not the water. The villagers murmured. They thought Mohan's claim was unfair, but they waited for Bola's decision. Chapter 5: The Wise Judgment. Bola thought for a moment and then spoke. Mohan, you said the water belongs to you, but the well belongs to Ramu. Is that correct? Yes, Mohan said confidently. In that case, Bola said, you have no right to keep your water in Ramu's well. You must remove it immediately. Mohan's face turned red. He realized he had been outsmarted. If he removed the water, the well would be useless to him. Defeated, he agreed to let Ramu use the water without extra payment. The villagers cheered. Ramu thanked Bola for his wisdom. From that day on, Ramu used the well freely, and his crops flourished. Chapter 6: A Lesson for Everyone. The story of the farmer and the well spread far and wide. It taught people the importance of fairness and honesty. Mohan, ashamed of his greed, became a better person. He started helping villagers instead of taking advantage of them. Ramu had a great harvest that year. He paid Mohan the remaining gold coins and became one of the most respected farmers in the village. As for Bola, he continued to lead the village with wisdom and kindness, ensuring that everyone lived in peace and harmony. The end. Thanks for watching English Language Academy. Subscribe now.